understand the culture. This is, oh, thank you. This is one of their ads. Oh, where's that gone? It stopped me sharing there.
Sorry, that was because I pressed the record button. I didn't ask permission. I apologize. Is that all right with you?
Oh, absolutely fine. You carry on.
Thank you.
So, so we'll go forward. This is the video.
The English believe it's a slur on your host's food if you don't clear your plate. Whereas the Chinese feel you're questioning their generosity if you do. At HSBC, we never underestimate the importance of local knowledge. Which is why we have local banks staffed by local people in more countries than anyone else. HSBC, the world's local bank.
Now, see, I do like that, but it does remind us of the need to not assume that the culture that we inhabit is the same as the culture of those that we're trying to reach. So the first question we might want to ask is, what is culture? A useful definition comes from the Lausanne Committee for World Evangelization. And this is quite a long one, but it covers everything. It's about our sense of reality, of values, of customs, how we behave, how we relate to others, and of institutions which express and actually continue and transmit those customs. So I think that's a really good definition. Dave, I'll let you have these slides later if people want to scribble or copy these definitions down. I'll send you a PDF of the slides. Another well-known one from Lloyd Quast is, culture is the patterned way of doing things within a particular society. Graham Cray, the former Bishop of Maidstone, and a key person in the Fresh Expressions movement, said culture is simply the way we do things around here. If we were having this conversation live, I'd probably sort of offer my hand to one of you, and instinctively you would shake my hand, because culture is also what we do when we don't know that we're doing it. And often, if somebody offers you their hand now because of COVID, we might wonder whether we've got hand sanitizer and all other things first. But in those days, those heady days before COVID, we would have just shaken somebody's hand if they'd offered it to us. But as I say, with the HSBC ad, we have to be aware that the culture we inhabit may not be the same one. So just as a question, what do you think was front page headline in the newspaper yesterday? And you can just shout out, that's fine. Unmute and shout out. Yesterday's newspaper. What was the front page headline?
Wagatha.
Wagatha. We're all getting a bit tired about Wagatha Christie now, aren't we? But well, let me go through and I'll show you, and we'll see what whether you're surprised or not. So the key papers, the Mail, which has a circulation of just around about 1 million. The Sun, which no longer publishes its circulation figures, but is probably about the same. The key thing there was that Her Majesty the Queen was out and about and celebrating and looking wonderful. So that was on the front page of the Sun and the Daily Mail. those are the two dominant papers in the newspaper scene, really, in terms of circulation. Another story is Boris going to war with the EU. The Express has a circulation of about 220 something thousand. The Eye has a circulation of only about 140 something thousand. So compared to the Sun and the Daily Mail, not great things. Very serious minded story. The Times and the Guardian. The Times has a circulation, we don't know what its circulation is now, because like the Sun, it doesn't publish it. Certainly probably around the kind of 300 and something thousand, maybe a bit less. The Guardian has a circulation of only about 100 and something thousand now. But you see, they've picked up on a story about Priti Patel and the police kind of going at each other, and some changes that mean that the government is effectively getting more involved in local policing, which those involved in local policing don't seem to like. The Metro's got a big circulation, or at least they print a lot, because it's at all the stations and stuff like that, is saying that Kiev will host the Eurovision next year because, of course, Ukraine won. And then the Mirror, which has a circulation of only about 330 something thousand, was picking up on the hate crime in America. Now, I mention all this because it's quite interesting to reflect on. Oh, the Star, by the way, which only has a circulation of 195,000, was picking up on some weather stuff that it wanted to predict. But the newspaper that we read will shape something of the way that we see the world, as will the way that we maybe listen to the radio, even if we listen to the radio at all. So some of you will be entirely at home with this sort of thing.
It's just been announced from Downing Street that Mrs. Thatcher is to resign as Prime Minister. Labour have swept to power in the election. They're heading for their biggest ever majority of 100. Indian police are holding a pigeon under armed guard because they suspect it's been on a spying mission for Pakistan.
Now, if you're used to those soft tones of Radio 4, actually many of our traditional churches sound a bit sort of Radio 4-ish, really. And sometimes the vicar even sounds as plummy as dear old Peter, the continuity announcer there. There are about 6.62 million people tune in to, say, the Today programme on Mondays to Saturdays. But contrast that with what other people might be watching, something like this.
You guys believe that works? Let me put it to the test right now. I'm applying the contour and blush right above where the ribbon is. Gonna tap on it lightly to make sure that it blends really, really nicely. This kind of works. It's not bad, but I'm gonna pass on.
So that's a TikTok video from the amazing Huda Beauty. Now she has something like 46.8 million followers. TikTok was the most downloaded, the #1 downloaded app. So actually the kind of way that people get information these days has changed. The Today program might be somewhat out, 6-point-something million. TikTok, tens of millions of people watching influencers like Huda Beauty talking about, as you can see there, how to apply makeup. Very, very useful, I thought. But think about that and think about the church culture. And where does the church culture fit with the way that people access information these days? You will have seen this lovely reminder of somebody encountering church culture of which they were only vaguely aware. Now, clearly, that's a caricature, and none of our churches is quite like that. But actually, look at how they've shown it. Look at what people are wearing. Look at the kind of music that's there. There's a very strong cultural signal being given out about what the church is, and contrast that with the male, the Sun, the influencer Huda Beauty's take on how to apply makeup. Very, very different cultural signals. And there's a bit of an elitism at work sometimes among the church. The theologian Tex Sample, great name. John Drain references him, and Tex talks about the class captivity of the church. And he talks about highly differentiated language used to comb the innards of the privileged, and rituals of supremacy. There's something about the culture of the church, and it may have something to do with fees-paying schools and all sorts of other things, but actually it's a culture that is very different from the culture in which many people live. Now, David Bosch, who I'm always happy to quote, says, God is a missionary God who crosses frontiers towards the world. You'll know the passage, the Great Commission, as we call it, although actually it's a reiteration of the way that God commissions and recommissions his people from Genesis chapter 12 onwards, but that's another sermon and another day. The key thing here is that we're told to go, therefore, and make disciples. We say of all nations. The word is ethne, people. The go and make disciples of all ethnicities, all cultures, all kinds of people. And what does that look like? Well, in another verse, in Acts 1, verse 8, we're told, you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, the area you know. If you like, for the church, this is what we know. We know when to sing Alleluia in all creatures of our God and King. Judea, these are the people on the fringe. These are the people that maybe access us through things like baptism or weddings or funerals, or they come at Christmas or remembrance. And our church has a fringe, those near Jerusalem, so Judea. Samaria, these are the ones who've fallen out with us in one way. There are a lot of de-churched people around, and you will meet them in various times. And these are people who maybe they sang in a choir once and then fell out with the organist, or the choir fell out with the vicar. That happens occasionally. Or maybe these are people that just moved house and dropped out of the habit of coming to church. Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth. Those who have had no experience of church at all, who wouldn't even know as much as Mr. Bean knows. And these are the people that we're called to reach and to spend time with. You will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, in Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. And just as a final point on this, look what's happened to the center of gravity of our mission. The center of this is not the church. Now, that's the first part, and it will be good to break into our groups now and to have a bit of a conversation. There is a way I can pause the presentation. Does that pause it for you? Have I disappeared? I did wonder what that did. It just says your screen sharing is paused. Presumably that's so that just gives you a blank thing. I'll stop sharing for now so that we can break into groups. So I'm fascinated by the new stuff that that they've given us to play with on Zoom. So that puts up a screen so I can then fiddle with my presentation and get it all sorted again and then carry on. That's really clever. I like that.
Terrific. Okay, so I'm going to assign people randomly into 4 different rooms. And how long should this be for, Bishop Roger? About 10, 15 minutes?
10 minutes or so, yeah.
10 minutes? Do you just want to repeat the question or repeat the assignment?
Really, it's to begin to tease out that stuff about the culture. You might want to think about the culture that you inhabit, the culture that your church represents, and the culture of your people you're trying to reach. And that might be 3 different cultures. And actually talk about the differences and tease some of that stuff out in this conversation.
Okay, so you'll be invited to join a breakout room now. And I'm opening all the rooms and see you back in about 10 minutes.
Do you want me to join, Dave?
Up to you entirely.
I'll just pick up this message first.
Okay, sure.
Cool. That was the gym following up because they thought they hadn't seen me in a while, and I was there today. Obviously, sign me in as someone else. Now, I might use a quote from a book.
Have you seen the window in the extension at St Mary's Wivenhoe?
Yes.
Yeah, by James Dodds.
Right. Yes.
We
I'm trying to remember it now. I've certainly seen it.
It's a boat and then a dove. With
yes, that's right.
Yeah, beautiful. We got visited yesterday by an Australian priest who I hadn't seen for 27 years from Bathurst, New South Wales. I used to do parish missions around Western New South Wales with him in the 90s. And he's a very good stained glass creator. So he's got 200 of his stained glass windows scattered around central West New South Wales. Interesting bloke. And he said, have you heard of James Dodds? And I said, well, no, I don't think I have. He said, oh, he does woodcuts and stained glass windows. So we Googled James Dodds, found out he'd done this window
Yeah.
at Wivenhoe. So I rang Erwin and said, can we have a look in at St Mary's Wivenhoe? And Erwin kindly opened the church and we went to look in and told us that James Dodds's studio was just round the corner. So we were able to walk out of St Mary's and actually visit James Dodds, who was extremely kind and generous with his time. And well, he didn't really want to get rid of us. I think he quite enjoyed having a fan from Australia come over to inspect his studio. We bought a few postcards and he gave us some catalogs, books. So it was a wonderful experience and really felt like an unexpected and surprising joy for Paul, our visitor, to meet this person who he had heard of and seen pictures on the internet of some of the woodcuts he'd done. Right there in our backyard, working in.
It's a great extension, that as well. It's lovely.
Brilliant.
They've done a really good job.
Yeah.
Do you know how regularly it's used?
I don't. I mean, the last time I was there was to kind of bless it, really.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the take up is and being used, but I do know that the day before I was there, they had a kind of community thing with different community groups with stalls in the church and stuff like that. And they were visited by Alison Moyet, you know, former lead singer of Yazoo and solo artist and all the rest of it.
Very good.
Who's of course an Essex girl.
Oh, is she? Oh,
Okay.
right.
Yeah. She's part of the Basildon crowd.
Yeah.
So Vince Clarke from Basildon was in Depeche Mode, and then hooked up with Alison Moyet to form Yazoo, and then went on to form Erasure. So yeah, all good Essex
Amazing.
stock.
Amazing. Down in Wivenhoe.
Yeah, people were very excited the day after.
I bet they were.
But you know, that's typical Essex. We produce these great stars, you see.
Yeah.
We do.
You know, Mr.
also-
Eurovision.
It's in keeping with the, but it's in keeping with what you were showing from the papers.
Yeah.
Mm,
So show some celebrities and everybody will turn up.
yeah. Are you following the Wagatha Christie thing,
Not
Dave?
properly, no. I just see the headlines. I'm afraid I don't read the details.
Because of course Wayne Rooney was giving evidence today, I think.
Was he?
And of course, if all goes according to plan, and he's still in place, Wayne Rooney will have to visit the Memorial Stadium in Bristol,
Of course he will. Yeah.
which is quite something, really. We're looking forward to seeing Wayne,
Very good. Very good.
and that's because Imi now lives in Kegworth. Pride Park is a really easy place for us to get to for the away match. So
Right. Of course. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Good one.
So we're just now waiting with bated breath for the fixture list.
Right. League One.
How much do you
Mm.
follow football?
How much do I?
Yeah.
Well, I've been to probably getting on for a dozen games this season.
No, that's a lot.
Yeah.
I like rugby.
Yeah, well, you see, I have a fondness for that as well. But I knew this wasn't going to be the year for Wales.
Mm.
So I was happy not to manage my diary around the Welsh fixtures. But
Good one.
they'll get there. They'll regroup.
Mm.
But it's very much, you know, Wales had I think just the most extraordinary talismanic captain in Alan Wynne-Jones, and him then. Well, he played the last game for us this year, But apart from that, I mean, he's pretty much done now. And it's a real turning over. It's a change of era. So it's not going to be quite the same.
Mm.
Do you want to call them back at some
Yes.
point, Dave?
I will. I can see. Right, 20:03. So that takes 1 minute to close the room. So I'll close the rooms now.
Very good. And I'll get the screen back up. Because of the way I've got things, I'll need you to let me know that they're all back.
Right. Okay. So yeah, when I see 16 in the room, I'll tell you.
Lovely.
Okay.
Welcome back, everybody.
What time is it?
Yeah, turn your finger off. Mute.
Right,
Okay.
Good. It hasn't messed me up. It did last time.
All right, everybody's back now. So let's go to part 2. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, one of the things that you might have reflected on is the fact that we are in a time of quite significant cultural change in this country. That people like, well, there are various writers who've talked about the fact that we're entering a post-Christendom age. Stuart Murray being one of the key ones of those, and one of the others who talks about it a lot is Michael Frost. And if you've not got a copy of his book Exiles on your shelf, do get a copy. It's a superb book. And this is what he says by way of an introduction. He says, this book is written for those Christians who find themselves falling into the cracks between contemporary secular Western culture and a quaint old-fashioned church culture of respectability and conservatism. This book is for the many people who wish to be faithful followers of the radical Jesus, but no longer find themselves able to fit into the bland, limp, unsavory straitjacket of a church that seems to be yearning to return to the days when everyone used to attend church and Christian family values reigned. This book is for those who can't remain in the safe modes of church and who wish to live expansive, confident Christian lives in the world without having to abandon themselves to the values of contemporary society. This book is for those Christians who feel themselves ready or yearning to jump ship, but don't want to be left adrift in a world where greed, consumerism, laziness, and materialism toss them about endlessly and pointlessly. Such Christians live with a nagging tension of being at home neither in the world nor in the church as they've known it. Many pioneers will hear something like that introduction from Mike Frost and think, good grief, he's talking about me. And some of that is about how we understand, how we relate to the cultures in which we find ourselves. So this is going to be the theory bit in part 2. And we're going to look at a particular theory of understanding culture. But first to note, culture is really complex. We've talked about it being about what you believe. It's about the values. It's about particular behaviors and all sorts of things. It has, therefore, a very wide range of elements. And there are many differences within our own ethnos. So you look around, if you look around a place like Colchester, for example, there are all sorts of cultures rubbing up against each other, all sorts of people, and there will be language differences, not just foreign language, but actually the way young people speak about certain things will be different from the way that that older people think about things, and words change their meanings. So mission at any place in the UK has a cross-cultural element. And it's possible for us in the church, particularly, I think, to be culturally blind, to not notice sometimes the culture difference and the huge gap there is between those who understand and get the culture and those who don't. So we're going to look at a theory that helps us to understand culture a bit more. And it's a theory that looks at the layers of understanding of culture, much as Shrek does here.
For your information, there's a lot more to ogres than people think. Example? Example? Okay, ogres are like onions.
They stink?
Yes. No.
Oh, they make you cry?
No.
Oh, you leave them out in the sun, they get all brown, start sprouting little white hairs.
No. Layers. Onions have layers. Ogres have layers. Onions have layers. You get it. We both have layers.
Oh, you both have layers. Oh. You know, not everybody like onions. Cake! Everybody loves cakes. Cakes have layers.
I don't care what everyone likes. Ogres are not like cakes.
You know what else everybody like? Parfait. Have you ever met a person, you say, hey, let's get some parfait. They say, hell no, I don't like no parfait. Parfaits are delicious.
No! You dense, irritating miniature beast of burden. Ogres are like onions. End of story. Bye-bye. See you later.
So the theory we're going to look at is basically saying that people are like onions. And the center of the onion, we're going to do it from the inside out, although we normally experience this from the outside in. And this, just so you know, this is Quast's layers of an onion. And it's his theory. It's a model created by the anthropologist Lloyd Quast, and it demonstrates culture as an ever deepening interface of behaviors, values, beliefs, and worldview. And the diagram that we're using is very similar to one that he used in a book called Understanding Culture. And we start with the worldview. What is real? What you think about the world, this is, and what you think about the world when you're not thinking. Although it's hard to define, it relates to how people perceive truth and time and God and ultimate reality. It embodies the unifying concepts within culture. Some describe it as the meta-narrative, the big story or meta-grid that makes sense of everything. Everyone has a worldview, religious or not. And in much of the West today, that core is based around individual fulfillment and materialism. That's what's at the heart of the worldview of a large number of people, and consumerism and the market economy. The Enlightenment brought rationalism to the center of our culture in how we interpret the world. And actually, that has quite a major effect on the way that we understand culture in the West. And another time I might have drawn on some of the insights of David Bosch, who wrote a stunning little book about believing in the 21st century. That's now 27 years old, his book, but absolutely stunning about the change of worldview, how culture has come to have the worldview it has. But that's at the heart of where we are. The next layer of our onion is the values. What's good or best? And these flow from our worldview. Our convictions about ultimate realities will influence what we value. Our beliefs about origins, purpose, identity, relationships, they will affect and shape our choices and our motivations and what we hold important. Individualism puts a high value on developing ourselves and education. Identity based on materialism leads us to put value on what we can acquire, rather than cultures with values flowing from a more communal worldview. I was reading about King Gillette, the person who gave his name to the disposable razor. He got ousted from his own company because he couldn't hold to the expansive consumer type ideology of the company. Gillette wanted to sell all the shares and to keep them keep the whole thing as a kind of non-profit, benefiting the poor, so that we would live in a more equal way. And Gillette became one of the biggest companies in the world, and did none of those things that King Gillette wanted. It was a clash of values, and many of the sayings, many of the things that we will say that we believe to be true, reflect our values. The next one is forms and meanings. These are the common conventions and understandings that culture puts on patterns and traditions and behaviors. In fact, they connect the values to the outward stuff, the behaviors that we'll look at in a bit. One example is when people sit with their legs crossed and the soles of their feet towards somebody else. In the Middle East, that may be seen as rude and offensive, whereas in the West, it means that you're relaxed and feeling at home. Another example might be that in some cultures, dogs are regarded as infected pariahs and are to be avoided and treated cruelly. Now, that's a value statement, whereas the miniature manicured lap dog is the prized, loved companion in other places. Language is another key carrier of culture. It's made up of diverse sounds, forms to which we give meanings, and even these change in different cultures. You know, I lose track of whether bad is good or bad is bad, whether sad is good or sad is bad, because these things keep changing depending on the age group and people going through things. You know, it used to be something was wicked or cool or whatever. These kind of words have flexed over time. In the field of religion, forms and meanings are especially important. There are certain things that we do, Easter eggs, Christmas presents, bread, wine. They're all in the whole area of symbols, forms that are vehicles for meaning, forms that carry alternative meanings. The cross for one person might represent self-denying, sacrificial love, while for somebody else, it might be a fashion accessory that enables them to identify with a particular self, indulgent, self-obsessed celebrity. So forms and meanings, and then on the outside of the surface, behavior. The outer layer of the onion, the one that we see first, is actually shaped and given meaning by the forms and meanings, the values and the worldview. To understand and influence a culture, we need to look below the surface. And in fact, we need to address the gospel to the heart of culture. The hard-learned lessons of mission are that the secret of best practice is to first find gospel connections with people, and then to address the gospel to, as near as possible, the center or the core of culture. If the gospel of grace is integrated into a worldview, then the way culture works may mean that it will permeate through values to behavior and produce an authentic Christian community. That was exactly the approach of Jesus in preaching the message of the kingdom of God in his own context. Culture evolves over time. No, its development is shaped among other things, by the fundamental challenges that are common to the human condition. And those include insecurity, fear, uncertainty, alienation, isolation. So culture gets molded to meet those universal needs, which are implicit in the challenges. Many aspects of a culture serve to give a sense of group solidarity and a conviction that we are right, that we're doing things the right way, and maybe that we are therefore better than others who have different cultural norms. The biblical theology underlying these truths are those of humanity seeking justification and righteousness through patterns of observance of law within their cultural imperatives. And it's for these reasons that we can be confident that within every culture there will be a doorway for the gospel of grace to replace these foundations of cultural security. A gospel of grace is about a God who himself provides our righteousness, our identity, our security, our belonging, all as gift. The good news of the kingdom is able to transform the core of any worldview based on new, inalienable identity as children of God. And that means that we don't need to strive to find our place in the universe through cultural conformity. We can receive our identity through the dynamic of trusting in God. Some of you will have hopefully picked up a copy of this book, Listening for Mission, or seen it around. I still think it has some value and there are some good things in it. And it tells us that we need to listen and learn, that we need to understand the meanings of particular cultures' forms. We need to understand the hidden values and the hidden worldview of the culture that we're seeking to reach. And the more different the culture that we engage with in mission, the more patient and painstaking that listening will have to be. And we also need to look for the gospel connections with the culture, those doorways that are open. Things like security, identity, belonging, self-esteem. And we can speak confidently into those, connecting something of the gospel story and the grace and love of Christ to those needs that the person has. So what that leads us to is a process of critical contextualization. What Hirsch and Frost say in their brilliant book, Shaping of Things to Come, Alan Hirsch and Michael Frost that we've already heard from, they say the gospel message as we find it in scripture is for all peoples, all nations, and all subcultures. Yet it is expressed in terms of the Jewish and Greco-Roman cultural context of the first century. Therefore, for God's message to cross from that context into ours, or from our context to others in evangelistic ministry, there has to be a complex work of contextualization. And that is about keep that which is not unbiblical. So some things about our culture we might want to challenge, but there's no harm in keeping some things which by themselves are not unbiblical. We need to reject that which is unbecoming for Christians. We need to modify practices to give them an explicitly Christian meaning, much as we've done with Christmas and Easter in the past. We need to reject current unbiblical practices and replace them. We need to adopt rites drawn from the Christian heritage, and we need to create new symbols and rituals. And the objective here is for not yet Christians to see that Jesus is for the host community. That is, that Jesus has the host communities, the host cultures' best interests at heart. He's on their side and against anything that might cause them harm. In a world where many non-Christians assume that God hates them, it's important to make one of the goals of the incarnational church planting and fresh expressions to help people connect with the God who is seeking them and desiring their friendship. So you might just want to chew that over again in your groups and talk about how that may make sense of some of the work that you are doing and some of this cross-cultural thing that you're involved in. And again, give yourselves, I guess, about 12 minutes. That would be great.
Okay, I'm going to open these rooms again and see you in about 12 minutes. And I will tell you when we've got everybody back in the room.
Lovely, and I'll get the screen back up. And then do we keep everybody together for the final session?
I think so, yes.
That'll be great.
Tony.
Starting in progress.
Welcome back, folks.
Brilliant.
And everybody's back now. That's great.
Okay.
Everybody's back. Great. So, so in this final session, I want to talk about something that happened, which is quite shocking. It happened a few years ago now, and a leader in evangelism in the country, somebody who will be a familiar name maybe to one or two of you, he described it like this in his book, Emerging Evangelism. A so-called preacher is addressing a large and influential New Age congregation. He doesn't begin with a biblical text, but dwells on a particular New Age symbol. He not only quotes various New Age gurus, but agrees with them. He doesn't quote the Bible. He doesn't use the name of Jesus, and he gives no account of the cross and the atonement. He adopts a sort of universalistic stance and assumes that all his hearers are on their way to God. Indeed, he praises them for their religious zeal. At the end of this feeble effort, he asks them to respond. Rather surprisingly, some do. Of course, the incident that John Finney's referring to is Paul in Athens. A familiar thing for some of you. I'll read it through very quickly. And then I just want to say a few words about this. While Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was deeply distressed to see that the city was full of idols. So he argued in the synagogue with the Jews and the devout persons, and also in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be there. Also, some Epicurean and Stoic philosophers debated with him. Some said, "What does this babbler want to say?" Others said, "He seems to be a proclaimer of foreign divinities." This was because he was telling the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. So they took him and brought him to the Areopagus and asked him, "May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting? It sounds rather strange to us, so we would like to know what it means." Now, all the Athenians and the foreigners living there would spend their time in nothing but telling or hearing something new. Then Paul stood in front of the Areopagus and said, "Athenians, I see how extremely religious you are in every way. For I went through the city and looked carefully at the objects of your worship. I found among them an altar with the inscription to an unknown God. What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it, he who is Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in shrines made by human hands, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mortals life and breath and all things. From one ancestor, he made all nations to inhabit the whole earth, and he allotted the times of their existence and the boundaries of the places where they would live. so that they would search for God and perhaps grope for him and find him, though indeed he's not far from each one of us, for in him we live and move and have our being, as even some of your own poets have said, for we too are his offspring. Since we are God's offspring, we ought not to think that the deity is like gold or silver or stone or an image formed by the art and imagination of mortals. While God has overlooked the times of human ignorance, now he commands all people everywhere to repent, because he's fixed a day on which he will have the world judged in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed. And of this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead. When they heard about the resurrection of the dead, some scoffed, but others said, we will hear you again about this. So Paul was actually, to give the background, he was stuck in Athens. He was waiting for a couple of mates to arrive. But Paul was not the kind of guy to take a holiday. So instead, he wandered around Athens and looked at their objects of worship. And being a convert to Christianity from Judaism, which was intensely monotheistic, he believed that there was only one God. But here he was, wandering among the shrines to a whole panoply of gods. And it must have made him sick to the core. These people didn't think the way he thought. These people had a different center to their onion. They had a completely different worldview. And the emptiness, the shallowness, the lostness of their lives would have upset him. But he wouldn't turn away from what upset him. Instead, he set about finding out more. At some point, and it doesn't say when, he must have sat down and read their poetry. He found out as much as he could about the Athenian culture. And then he threw himself into the fray, going to the synagogue, the marketplace, debating with the people there. Athens was a place that thrived on debate. They loved to hear and discuss new ideas. After making something of an impact, he was invited to speak at what I guess amounted to the theology department of Athens University. He kind of had long to prepare, yet he knew this was a crucial opportunity. But what to say? Even though their misplaced devotion to pagan gods had upset him, he couldn't just stand up there and rubbish him. That would be that. They'd stop listening. So he cleared his throat and began, "Men of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious." Now, Martin Atkins of the Methodist Church picks up on this. He says, Paul, a Jew, a Pharisee, a walking law machine, walks into an unclean Gentile environment, sees a graven image to an unknown God, and comments to his hearers how much they share in common. Make no mistake, today's equivalent is a Methodist minister walking into a witch's coven and declaiming, I see we share an interest in spiritual things. There's something shocking at the heart of this story. Paul then spoke about an altar he'd seen dedicated to an unknown God. Now, this shows that Paul had done his homework. He found out about the people of Athens and wanted to then speak about his faith in a way that connected with the people there. You see, back in the 6th century BC, there was a Cretan hero and philosopher called Epimenides, and he had been called to Athens to help the city to get rid of a terrible plague. The Athenians' own oracle had declared that the city was under a curse because of war crimes committed in the past, and none of the gods they worshipped seemed to have the power to lift that curse. As a way of resolving the dilemma, Epimenides suggested that there may be a god whose name they did not know. And to test the idea, he sent some sheep out to Mars Hill in Athens to graze. And he said that if any sheep lay down, they should be sacrificed on an altar dedicated to this unknown God. Now, some sheep did lay down and they were sacrificed, and the plague was duly lifted. St. Paul then refers to this altar and he quotes a line from a poem about how we are all God's offspring, a poem written by, wait for it, Epimenides. Now, Paul didn't mince his words. He talked about repentance and judgment and resurrection. But in time, people there would turn away from that paganism, and churches would be built where once their shrines had stood. It's a great example of somebody encountering a culture that in some ways seems quite alien to them. Back in autumn 2008, Channel 5 screened a documentary, and it was called Bad Habits and Holy Orders. It featured 5 girls in their late teens and early 20s who, to quote, love to drink, party, have sex, and take selfies. The girls had signaled some kind of level of dissatisfaction with the way that they were living, and they responded to an invitation to engage in some sort of spiritual quest, but the program makers hadn't told them what. What none of the participants envisaged was that they would be spending a month living at the Daughters of the Divine Charity Convent in Swaffham, Norfolk. Now, there have been television programs of a similar nature before, such as BBC's The Monastery and The Convent and The Retreat. Where the Channel 5 program differed from those is the extent of the cultural gap between the participants and the nuns who hosted them. This is the trailer.
I don't think that's going to be suitable.
Habits, Holy Orders, coming soon to Channel 5.
Now, Rebecca, Sage, Sarah, Paige, Tyler, and Gabby were the least nun-like individuals that you could ever imagine. But something began to happen to them when they were there. This is a clip of a conversation that they had.
Yeah. I loved my mom so much, and I still love her. And it's like, oh my God. Yeah. And I prayed for her a lot. And
it was very difficult. It was very difficult.
Just realising what's important, isn't it? Because things that really are important don't be taken away just like that. You're very brave talking about it as well to us. Like, you don't have to share it with us.
Yeah. The atmosphere changed completely. It was as if somebody had turned the light switch. You know, we went from, we're partying, that's what we need to do, we don't need to change, to perhaps we ought to be thinking about our family. Our lives are very emotional, aren't they? And if we let people in to our lives, then there is pain and there is suffering. Yeah.
Oh. I can't even get my words out.
No, I think it might be time for a cup of tea.
Yeah.
Like the fact that I put family and alcohol in the same bubble, I was just a bit like, and then when I thought about it, I was like, that is so shallow. Like, I was not expecting this at all. Being here has just made us think, like, just think about all the stuff like that's happened between like, my dad and my family. I've done so many bad things, like everything that I've done is just like to kind of punish my parents.
So the natural assumption would have been that the nuns' cloistered existence would be utterly disrupted by the arrival of the 5 girls, and their beautiful peace would be shattered. The girls, one might have concluded, were largely beyond redemption. And there were certainly lapses. The girls smuggled in some alcohol. They enjoyed a fairly riotous night in one of Swaffham's local pubs, but they also began to change. They had to live without their mobile phones. Some of the girls chose to remove their makeup and nail extensions, and a week of voluntary work led to them being attracted to a more selfless lifestyle. When they returned home, Tyra renounced her addiction to shopping for clothes and accessories that had become a £40,000 per year habit. She gave many of her possessions away to a charity shop and began volunteering with a homeless project in Leeds. Paige chose not to go clubbing as often and went back to working with horses. She was saving up to go travelling and to do some voluntary work abroad. Gabby, who'd carved out a career posting glamorous pictures of herself on the internet, posted a picture of herself without makeup with the hashtag #LoveYourself. Sarah gave up drinking on weekdays and embraced a somewhat more restrained lifestyle. But perhaps the person most transformed by living with the nuns for 4 weeks was Rebecca. At the start of the program, she commented that she thought on entering the convent, she was going to be set on fire for all her sins. Her previous riotous behavior had created a serious rift with her parents, such that her father was no longer talking to her. That was her talking to camera at the end of that snip. Rebecca did not want to be in the convent and appeared at first to be the most resistant of the participants. On returning home, she enrolled on a college course in order to train to be a health worker. She worked hard to rebuild her relationship with her parents and also gave up one-night stands in favor of longer-term relationships. All the participants had grown to love and respect the nuns. And what made the transformation in the lives of the young girls possible was the decision by the nuns not to withdraw and quarantine themselves from the outside world and protect their culture, but instead for them to be ready to embrace the people and in doing so reveal to them a different way of life, a different core to the onion. The nuns held on to the fundamental belief that the girls had good hearts and added that they are good because God made them. They were also realistic about human frailty and the temptation to revert to old habits, characteristics that they believed they shared with the girls, although the nuns' temptations might have been more to do with chocolate biscuits rather than alcohol and sex. The nuns also planted 5 roses named after the girls so that they could continue to pray for them. The lasting reminder of that clash of cultures in the girls' visit was an outward sign that the nuns themselves were willing to accept change as they embraced new people. Miroslav Volf talks about the will to embrace and says that at the core of the Christian faith lies the persuasion that the others need not to be perceived as innocent in order to be loved, but ought to be embraced even when they are perceived as wrongdoers. He says the will to embrace is like a stance prior to any judgment of the other. The will to embrace is the default stance, the foundational position of the Christian person. All judgments and actions flow from this will to embrace. And that means the will to give ourselves to others and to welcome them, to, if you like, engage in their culture.
Bishop Roger.
Yes.
It's Linda. I went to school in Swaffham with those nuns.
Excellent.
I was a boarder.
Excellent.
So I thought you ought to know that. That program meant a lot to me.
Wonderful. Well, I'm pleased. I'm pleased that we've been able to remind you of that. That's, for me, if you get anything from tonight, it's to do as Paul did, to do as those nuns did, to engage in a culture, even if there are things about the culture we don't like, but to express something of the gospel to the heart of that culture and to see those people transformed. We've got about 10 minutes where we'll stay together. I'll stop sharing the screen so I can see you all. And if there are any questions or points people want to make, fire away. You might have reflections on your own experience of different cultures.
Okay, I've got a question.
Ash, go for it.
Yep. Okay. So, no, I appreciate it this evening. Well, the question I have, let me try and specify it. We get back involved in a sinful nature to try and help others. How does it help your own sort of salvation?
I think that's exactly the dynamic that means that people in the church sometimes don't engage with other cultures. If you look at Jesus never compromised on who he is and what he was about but he was criticized because he hung around with the Amharets, with the unclean, with tax collectors and prostitutes and sinners. That didn't taint him. You see, it's a really odd understanding of pollution, that the idea that if Jesus hung around with people like that, Jesus would be polluted. And what actually happened was, as Jesus hung around with people like that, those people became sanctified. And in a way, that's what you saw with the nuns. The nuns didn't compromise. They held fast to the things that they believed were important. They certainly they weren't drawn into sin by those young people. But the presence of those nuns brought something challenging, something holy into the lives of those young people. So I don't think it's not about us going back into our sinful ways. Now, I say that sometimes we have to set ourselves limits. I've spoken to some people for whom engaging in a culture similar to the culture that they left when they became a Christian might drag them back into learned patterns of behavior that are ingrained in them that are their old self. And so quite wisely, they say, I don't think trying to reach that culture is a good thing for me. And sometimes people will have to make that decision. But on the whole, I think we need to be a bit more adventurous as church and be stepping out of our comfort and going out to the places and the people who inhabit different cultures.
I think for me, one of the really valuable things is this idea of recognizing that everyone we meet has been created in God's image. Therefore, everyone we meet has something of God's presence in their life. It doesn't matter whatever they engaged in, they still created in God's image. And the other thing that's been really formative, I think, about sort of my pioneering journey is recognizing that I can learn as much from them and their journeys as they can learn from me. And so there's this respect. And I think the nuns had that they were learning from the girls as well as the girls learning from them. So I think for us to imagine that we have all the answers and that we've come to change somebody's life, it can come across as very arrogant. Whereas if we come as pilgrims and recognizing that we are together, maybe at different stages of the journey, but together wanting to live our lives to the full, then immediately you've got something in common.
Yeah, that's really helpful. So so Martin Luther said, you know, das ist wahr, wir sind Bettlers, we're beggars. That is true. And I think that, you know, people have used the phrase, we're beggars showing other beggars where to find bread. Part of the difficulty is that the church culture is a high culture. And so there's a dynamic at work sometimes, which has got absolutely nothing to do with the Christian faith. But it actually says we're better than you. You know, you listen to songs where you can't work out what the singer's singing and they're really dreadful. We listen to beautiful Victorian melodies played on a pipe organ. You know, watch your influencers on TikTok and they talk really fast and stuff like that. And, you know, we have a service which sounds a bit like Radio 4. And, you know, if you'd like to pray and turn to such and such a page in your service book. And, you know, there's a kind of culture where it feels as though it's superior. And that culture, that's what Tech Sample's saying, stops us engaging with the people we're wanting to reach, because that they feel that sense of superiority coming from us, that somehow we're better. But we're better because we listen to Radio 4, not, you know, Radio 1, although people don't even listen to Radio 1 these days, you know, that sort of thing.
For me, Bishop Roger, tonight is something I think I'll always remember. In John's Gospel, the woman at the well, and the way Jesus spoke to her and dealt with her. And it seems an example of how he didn't judge her. He was on her wavelength. And the beautiful celebration at the end when she went and told all her neighbors what had happened. You know, it's it makes me reflect on that anyway.
Thank you. And those are the encounters we long for. Those are the encounters. And there was something interesting cultural going on there. Jesus had to read what was happening in the culture. Why is she coming out in the middle of the day? Nobody collects water in the middle of the day, unless they don't want to be with others who are collecting water. Unless there's something about them that means that they don't like hanging around with others. And maybe it's shame. Maybe, you know, so actually Jesus is reading the cultural signs. And we need to be doing that. We need to be reading the cultural signs around us, making sense of the world around us so that we can, you know, aim the gospel at the heart, at the center of the onion, so to speak. So I'm obsessed with onions now. Any other final points? We've got 2 minutes.
Yes, Bishop, I was just thinking about the point that you raised about creating new symbols and rituals. Do we have an example of what that really means? Because I've been kind of battling with it in my head, thinking about the cross and the Eucharist and things that I'm used to. What are these new symbols?
Well, I think sometimes it's about making, you know, it's that bridging activity. What do we have that will say something, that can say something to this person? And it's quite interesting. So by symbols, there's also symbolic actions. So one of the conversations I had, I have to say, I had with my wife, was talking about this time of year, she has queues of people who want to be blessed. It happens in the secondary school where she's head teacher, because they're just about to sit their GCSEs. And it's become a thing now that they come up and ask, they know she's a priest, they come up and ask, and she blesses them. And what she doesn't want to do is to use an oil and then give them a horrendous allergic skin reaction just while they're having their exam. So, you know, but placing a hand on their head when you pray for them and things like that, and actually maybe using water to make a sign of the cross on them to show that they've been blessed. And so there's a symbolic act going on there. A hospital chaplain I know didn't feel it was always appropriate to give people a holding cross. So he had some olive wood hearts, and he would give those to people that they could hold and begin to pray. But they had themselves a kind of quality that spoke of love and allowed a further conversation about the God who loved them. So I think we use what's around us, you know, in the way that Paul used an altar to an unknown God. We use what's around us and try and, you know, use that to bridge something of that gospel truth to the heart of that person's onion.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Dave and Janie, I guess I'm over to you. It's 9 o'clock, so.
Just to say thank you very much, Bishop Roger, for very thought-provoking presentations. I can see a few claps going on there and a few nods of the heads. That's terrific. Thank you very much, everybody, for engaging with us. I have no idea how your breakout room conversations went, so I'd be fascinated to get some feedback at some point. The next time we meet, which will be our final time, is June the 18th, when we will have David Mayle himself in person coming to address us. That will be in St Andrew's Hall at Stanway. I hope everybody can make it. And now, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, may you be blessed as you continue your pioneering missions. Amen.
Amen.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, all. Take care. Look after yourselves.
Right. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye. Have a blessed week.